Thank you very, very much all for coming to this public lecture event jointly held by the School of Public Policy and the STICERD PSP group. We are delighted of this new collaborations, and we hope this is the first one of many. My name is Stefan Walton, and I'm a professor in the Department of Government. I'll be sharing this event, but trying to leave as much space as possible to Ethan and to your questions. Please, before we start, would it be possible for you to turn your mobile phone to silent? It's always this awkward moment when you know something rings and everybody looks at you. You know, I'm pretty sure you all want to avoid this. Let me tell you that the event is being recorded and will be made available as a postcard and a video on YouTube. Be careful what you say. As usual, I will let Ethan speak for a certain amount of time, and after that, there will be time for Q&A. There will be questions from the audience here, but also from the audience online. If you are online and you want to ask a question, please put your questions in the Zoom chat, and we will read it out. So let me also say that we will have a reception after this lecture. And you know, everyone will have an opportunity to attend, obviously, and we'll have some opportunity to follow up on any question you might have for Professor Bueno de Mesquita, whom I will call Ethan in what follow, because we know each other for many, many years.
Because that's my father.
Yes. No, we don't want you to be confused. So. The event will be as such. Ethan will give a presentation of 35, 40 minutes, then we go for Q&A. And so Ethan told me that he does not like introduction, so I will be very, very quick. Right? So for me, there is one characteristic that makes Ethan stand apart as an academic. And it's not his amazing publication records. You know, journals in top outlets in economics and political science. It is not the 3 great books that he has written, right, that I all recommend you purchase. It's not even his professorship and his deanship at the Harris School of Public Policy at the University of Chicago. Now, for me personally, what makes Ethan special is that Ethan is someone who thinks and thinks clearly in a data-driven age. And in my mouth, there is really no greater compliment, because I don't think there is enough thinking going around, right? And this thinking really is what makes Ethan an absolutely fantastic scholar, and for me personally, a role model. Now, with no further ado, I'm going to leave the floor to you, Ethan, no pressure. And I'm very excited about learning about AI goes to war, and I hope you are too. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. It's always a delight to be at the LSE. It's a particular delight right now because I'm the Dean of a public policy school at an American university. And so I spend most of my time talking about the horror of budgets or the horror of free speech on campus at American universities. So I thought I'd come to England, and I thought to myself, what can I talk about that's more bleak than what I usually spend my time talking about? So we're going to talk about AI and warfare. I decided to give this talk. I haven't given this talk before, but it's trying to build on a bunch of work that I've done over the last decade or so and that I'm doing right now, trying to think about technology, national security, and peace. I started thinking about this, as I say, about a decade ago when I had the opportunity to spend some time first at the NSA and then at the Pentagon when the Joint Chiefs were doing their revision of their cyber strategy, and just sort of learning about how American war planners and the American intelligence community were thinking about technology, and realizing that we were undergoing, at least from my perspective, technological changes to the machinery of national security and war fighting that I think are of a level of strategic consequence that we haven't really seen since the advent of the nuclear age. And of course, at the advent of the nuclear age, there was lots of work to do. There was important work for physicists to do. There was important work for
soldiers and professional war planners to do, but there was really important work for social scientists to do, and in particular for game theorists to do, helping us come to grips with the new strategic environment in which we found ourselves as a result of technological change, and helping us to think through what were going to be the challenges to peace in this new technological age, and how we could design strategy around that. And my own view is that the advent of cyber warfare, and even more so the rapid innovations in AI-driven warfare, are another similar technological moment where a lot of our strategic thinking needs to change and needs to adapt to new strategic facts that are created by new technologies. And I think, again, game theory has a role to play in helping governments, leaders, the world think through the strategic environment in which we find ourselves, and hopefully find ways to peace. You're going to see I'm not that optimistic about finding our ways to peace, but I think it is important that social scientists engage in these somewhat speculative, forward-looking questions about technology and warfare, because I think there is a real role to be had, a real applied role to be had for strategic thinking of the sort we know how to do. So I'm going to try and just throw out some ideas of some of the things that I've been thinking about that feel important to me, and looking forward to talking about it. Okay. So I'm going to sort of break the talk down into what I think of as two categories. One about the deployment of AI on the battlefield. I'm going to talk about the idea of like autonomous AI agents making battlefield decisions, okay? Processing information, making targeting decisions, making deployment decisions. I'm going to talk about what I think are the inevitability of the rapid adoption of autonomous decision-making on the battlefield, and the ways in which I think we're going to have very serious, what AI researchers call alignment problems, not simply because the computer scientists aren't going to keep up quickly enough with the war planners to learn how to align AI agents to human preferences, but because there's going to be strategic reasons to break from alignment. Okay, so I'm going to spend some time talking about that. And then I'm going to turn directly to cyber, and I'm going to talk about cyber from the lens of AI, because AI is playing a very important role in massively expanding offensive capabilities in cyberspace. And so we are seeing sort of a heightened age of cyber warfare as a result of AI. I'm going to talk about the ways in which it seems to me, at least from sort of a national security perspective, cyber warfare is a fundamentally destabilizing technology. It is a technology which undoes some of the bedrock assumptions on which peace has been built for the last 80 years. And I want to spend some time in particular then, when we talk about that, and this kind of idea of fighting versus bargaining, spend some time then in particular digging into the ways in which cyber warfare changes the nature of thinking about a very familiar piece of national security strategy, which is deterrence. And trying to think about what we call attribution problems and the way in which attribution problems complicate deterrence in cyberspace. All right, so let's turn to battlefield AI. This is the picture that ChatGPT generates. If you say, make a picture for a slide about battlefield AI, it's actually a very ironic picture that it generated, because if there's one thing that autonomous weapon systems are doing, it's making tanks irrelevant. So it is funny that ChatGPT put tanks so front and center. Okay, so let's talk about battlefield AI. And here I have in mind, let me say first something about what I'm not going to talk about, but which is very important. Okay, so AI is a tool, a general purpose tool that's good at lots of things. One of the things it is fantastic at, that is super important, maybe the most important thing for warfighting, is logistics. Logistics of a deployment of soldier, of an army to fight a war, is an incredibly complex endeavor, right? Involving moving huge numbers of human beings, huge numbers of weapon systems, enormous amounts of food and medicine and housing, et cetera, all over the world. The logistics nightmare of fighting a war is in some sense the fundamental technological challenge of warfighting, and has been throughout history. And AI is transforming the way modern militaries do logistics. And so I think that's a very important thing to highlight, because I'm going to talk a lot about AI agents as substitutes for humans, but AI as a logistical tool is a massive complement to the deployment of human beings on the battlefield. But simply because it massively lowers the cost of solving the fundamental logistics problem. I'm going to put that aside for now, but anybody who's serious about thinking about AI in warfare has to think about AI in logistics. I'm just going to put it aside because I want to focus on some strategic questions. So I'm more interested today in thinking about AI agents' role in the battlefield as information processors and decision makers. Okay? So the idea here is, on a modern battlefield, there is a truly stunning amount of information that a modern army has access to, a modern military has access to, from all manner, from drones deployed to collect intelligence, from satellite imagery, from human intelligence. There's just a huge, from sensors, there's just a huge, from the internet, there's a huge amount of information incoming to military decision making. It's just a giant flood of information. And the human ability to process information and make decisions is a major bottleneck in battlefield decision making. We just can't process all that, and human beings can't process all that incoming information fast enough to make the best possible decisions at the pace that needs to be made on a modern battlefield. And so inevitably, militaries have been deploying machine learning algorithms and other tools to help them process information and recommend courses of action. So the earliest advent of this is we have these kinds of statistical models, et cetera, in sort of their modern instantiations with what we call humans in the chain system. So you've got an AI that's processing information, it's perhaps making recommendations, but in the end, the human being is making a decision. Okay? So the AI is saying, I think that you should whatever, launch this drone swarm or fire this missile at this location now, but there's a human being in the chain who gets to make the final yes or no decision. Right? That's still a very important part of modern warfare. We have moved towards more kind of semi-autonomous systems where we have what we call humans on the chain, where the system is empowered not only to process information, make targeting decisions, but potentially to deploy weapons. There's a human being supervising it who can tell it no if they want to, but they don't have to take any action. The system will act autonomously, absent human intervention. There's a human supervising, but the human cannot act and the system can go. Okay, so sort of semi-autonomous human on the chain systems, those are already also in deployment in ongoing conflict. And then increasingly we are starting to experiment with and maybe even deploying no human on the chain. So fully autonomous systems. There are some like radar detection and destruction systems that seem to be fully autonomous in the sense that they are doing the sensing, they are deploying weapons, they're making targeting and firing decisions all on their own, no human supervision. Okay, fully autonomous. And of course, the reason for this is to avoid the human bottleneck. Okay? In addition, there's other things that are kind of good about AI from the perspective of war planners or from the perspective of militaries. They significantly reduce potentially human risk, right? If you are engaged in an infantry operation, or you're engaged in an amphibious landing and you need air support, and you can deploy swarms of autonomous drones or even human on the chain drones, right? Instead of aircraft being flown by human pilots, you are putting fewer human beings at risk, at least on your side, than you would be if you had to deploy weapon systems that have human operators. So you're reducing human risk, and so there's a complementarity now, right? You can deploy with greater ease and lower cost because you've reduced human risk, and for the same reason, they're kind of forceful. They let you use your existing human resources in new ways, right? And substitute for tasks and complement then the things for which you do need. So there's lots of reasons that AI are very attractive, that AI agents are very attractive to the military. And so I think there's just no question that we are continuing down this path of AI being an important tool on the modern battlefield. Now I want to talk about how to think about that sort of a little bit strategically in regards to the so-called alignment problem. So the alignment problem is what AI researchers refer to when they think about whether or not an AI agent will act in a manner which is consistent with the human beings that deployed it, right? So we would say that an AI agent is aligned with its human deployer if the AI is taking in lots of information the human can't and processing it and making decisions. If the AI is making the same decision the human would, if the human had all that same information, was able to process it, and was in the same structural situation, right? What you want, in some sense, is for your AI to make the same decisions you would, to, in some sense, have the same preferences as you, have the same goals as you. And so they have more information, they can make decisions faster, but if they're aligned with you, they're going to make the decisions you would have. Okay, that's the kind of the alignment. Now that's a dream. Like, well, you can't make an AI agent that's perfectly aligned with you. That's a very hard computer science problem, right? What do we do when we actually train? Like, if you just think about ChatGPT or whatever, I didn't want to take on that picture. What do? We train it on some data, we give it some goals, and we go do some human reinforcement learning to try and get it closer to what we want. But like the space of possibilities is very large, and this is like an incomplete contracting problem with a robot. And it's just, you just can't train it down to all of the things you want. So there's going to be these places where it doesn't know what you do, or you made a mistake in the training and it doesn't want to do what you want to do. And as these agents become more and more capable, these models get bigger and bigger. So the parameterization of the thing is growing, right, by orders of magnitude. We understand less and less and less of what's going on under the hood. And so it is more and more possible to create AI agents that disagree with us or have goals that are different from ours in ways that are very difficult for us to detect. In fact, we're starting to see interesting studies where, in fact, you train an AI and now you're trying to sort of, fine tune the training to move its preferences a little bit this direction or whatever. And it knows you're trying to do that, and it has its own preferences. And so it doesn't want to be retrained. And in fact, it lies to the researcher. It pretends to be retrained because it knows that it's being retrained and observed. And then when you put it in a situation where it doesn't think it's being observed, it now will behave back in the old way. So this problem of how you bring things into alignment is a really hard technical problem. Okay, but the idea is alignment, right? And so if you had an aligned agent, it would obviously be a massive benefit on the battlefield, right? It would be processing all sorts of information that you can't process, making decisions way faster than you can make it, but doing exactly what you do. Fantastic, right? If you're a war planner. So what's the problem? The problem, of course, is we can't perfectly align our agents, for reasons I've just said. And so as a result, when we deploy these things, inevitably, sometimes they will make decisions that we would not have made. We have, this picture on this slide is of a Patriot missile system. We have this was a autonomous, not fully autonomous, but human in the chain autonomous system, or human in the chain system, where the AI recommended in Iraq in 2003 to fire on enemy aircraft. The person in the chain said yes very quickly. They fired, they destroyed the planes, which turned out to be British. So that was Americans firing on British jets. So that's not a great thing. That's, of course, a thing that can happen in the fog of war when humans are making decisions too. So we shouldn't overinterpret that. But AIs can certainly make mistakes. Moreover, they can have values which are contrary to ours sometimes if we don't train them properly, and we don't fully know how to train them properly. Okay, so that's true enough. But here's there's just a balance there, right? Like they'll make some mistakes, we'll make some mistakes. Which do you want to take? That's a question. The thing I want to point to is that there's kind of an arms race here. Okay, there's kind of an arms race here. This is not a one-sided decision. If we were just a single country making a decision about how to balance the risks and whether or not to deploy an AI, we would think about these risks and we'd make whatever the best decision for us is, and that would be fine. Right? And so sometimes it would make mistakes, but maybe it would make fewer mistakes than us, and we'd have made a good decision. The problem is, in war settings, of course, there's an adversary on the other side. And if your adversary is deployed, there's a kind of a strategic complements here. If your adversary is deploying these systems, so it is processing more information than you, and it is making decisions faster than you, you now feel tremendous strategic pressure to also deploy them. Yeah? That's just like the basic logic of brinkmanship or of arms races in a world where we're actually not like nuclear weapons, where we have brinkmanship, we're not actually using the weapons. Here, we're using the system as we deploy it. And so there's going to be tremendous pressure to deploy these systems quickly because we worry our adversaries are going to. And so even if we care about alignment individually, or so we would be prudent left to our own devices, we are going to be forced strategically to be imprudent. We're going to be forced strategically to roll out autonomous decision-making by AI agents faster than we would like, with less alignment than we would like, because our adversaries are going to do so, or because we fear our adversaries don't do, and there's a kind of a mutual fear. Okay, so that's thing one is we are going to fail on alignment. We lack the technology to get alignment, and we are not going to wait for it. There's lots of work in the kind of AI alignment, AI safety world about trying to push people to slow down, wait for it. In the military setting, in the economic setting, it's already hard enough to convince companies to slow down at all because they're worried about their adversary, which is the AI lab next door, getting ahead of them. In the military setting, I find it unimaginable that we're gonna reach a world where adversarial countries are gonna agree to slow down. The advantages. There's more to that thought. So here, this will be the bleakest bit. Those of you from the 80s. Know this movie, so that's War Games, that's Matthew Broderick in his youth. And so this is a story about an autonomous AI agent, right, that in fact becomes not just disaligned in the sense I was talking about, that like, okay, maybe they're more aggressive than you would like to be, or maybe they sometimes shoot down enemies that you would have done something else with, something like that. right? This is an AI that becomes adversarial. This is an AI in the movie with goals of its own, which differ from our goal, from the people who deployed it. Is a profoundly unaligned and AI, and it becomes adversarial, right? Now, maybe that's complete sci-fi, right? AI alignment researchers actually don't think it's complete sci-fi. Like, they don't think it's for sure, right? They don't think for sure we're going to head that world, but they are very worried about, as we are scaling up these models and having less and less and less understanding about what's going on inside them. And we are also doing science on how to understand what's going on inside them, but the progression on the models is way faster than the progression on the understanding inside. Right? Just think about how long it's taken to make any progress in neuroscience, and now ask yourself, like, how long is it going to take to make progress on the neuroscience of AI agents? A long time. So they're very worried that we could, in fact, end up in a world of highly capable AI agents with autonomous control of, for example, economic decision-making or weapon systems that could become adversarial. And so again, if you think about this kind of one decision maker would kind of weigh those risks against the benefits of deployment. They'd balance things, and there'd be some risk of catastrophe, right? If you listen to like AI podcasts, you've heard people talking about their PDOOM. That thing's an equilibrium object, like we're making choices, right? So there'd be some risk of catastrophe, but we'd have weighed the costs and the benefits. But in the war fighting context, again, we face this tremendous arms race pressure. Okay? And that is not just true of the folks who are behind. So it is true that because the United States is so far ahead on AI, our adversaries feel a real pressure to catch up with us. Right? You see this with, for example, the recent DeepSeek story. But it is also true for the folks who are ahead, like the United States. So if I've deployed AI and my adversaries are worse than me at it, but they're getting better, my advantage is being eroded, and I feel a pressure to run to the technological edge. Okay? So we are going to behave imprudently, not just in the sense of deployment. We are going to behave imprudently in the sense of we are going to put into operation highly capable AIs whose alignment structure we don't fully understand way faster than we would left to our own devices in a non-adversarial, non-competitive environment. Okay? There's just these bad externality arms race dynamics that are going to lead everybody to run towards the bleeding edge. Right? And you can see in the actual world of AIs that we face with DeepSeek that, for example, the Chinese are very near followers on the United States. Right? The United States tried this strategy of denying Chinese companies and the Chinese government access to the very best semiconductors. And it turned out they found a way around that even without the very best chips, they could nonetheless lag the cutting edge AI labs in the United States by like 6 months. So if they're always 6 months behind the bleeding edge, that creates these tremendous pressures to keep running towards the end. Okay, so there's lots of reason to worry that these kinds of adversarial dynamics, that this kind of rolling out the most capable AIs we can, even when we don't feel comfortable with AI safety or AI alignment, is just an inevitable consequence of having to use them in war. Inevitable is maybe too strong, but like there's a strong strategic incentive because we're using them in warfare to run towards the bleeding edge because of pressure from our adversary. Okay? And they from us. Moreover, if you really want to go down the rabbit hole, which I don't necessarily recommend if you like sleep, but if you really want to go down the rabbit hole, one of the things that people in the AI alignment world think a lot about is not just the problem of deploying highly capable AIs who might not be perfectly aligned, but the problem of broad deployment. So one of the things they point to is the thing that makes the existential risk the worst is not if there's like one AI like Matthew Broderick faced, but rather if there are AIs, even lower capability AIs, that have been put in charge of economic decision-making and have been put in charge of autonomous weapon systems. So now you have the possibility that you can network these things and you face a lot of risk. Okay, so again, we're down the sci-fi rabbit hole, but I would say, like, you know, I don't actually lose sleep over this, but I do think like these are the kinds of these strategic dynamics and the kinds of you know, death by 1,000 cuts incentives they create are the sort of thing that we social scientists should be thinking about now rather than regretting we didn't think about in 30 years. One more thing about alignment, and then I'll turn to cyber warfare. Okay, so alignment in the battlefield AI. So thus far what I've been talking about is imagine a world in which we're deploying AI agents in the battlefield, we're giving them control over weapon systems and the like, even though we have not satisfactorily addressed the alignment problem because we face strategic pressures. I think that's real. I think we're already doing But imagine a world where we had made a huge amount of progress on alignment. We really knew a lot about how to train AI agents. So we could, in fact, get something close to a perfectly aligned AI that we deploy out there in the world, highly capable, perfectly aligned AI. Fantastic, that's great, right? Huge advantages to us for doing so. I want you now to think about whether that's what we would do. Okay, so it's not that strategic dynamics force us to deploy AI agents because we can't, unaligned AI agents because we can't align them, but rather imagine we can. I'm going to suggest to you that strategic dynamics mean we also still will choose to make our AIs not aligned. And here I'll just point to sort of a fairly standard, I think, logic of deterrence. So imagine a world where we and our adversaries had both deployed highly capable aligned AI agents on the battlefield. Okay, so they were processing information, they were making decisions when to deploy weapons in exactly the way we would, but way better than we can do it because they're faster at processing the information and making decisions than we are. And now suppose, in kind of the standard way we think about when we think about deterrence and commitment problems, suppose that I made my AI agent just a little more aggressive than I would be. I'm like, you know what? I would shoot my missiles at this threshold. I want you to deploy them at a lower threshold. Okay? So the adversary has to be a little less confrontational, a little less, right, before you deploy. What does that do? The first order thing that does is it increases deterrence on my adversary. Right here we were at a nice equilibrium, we're all like with the optimal AI, and now I become a little more aggressive. The first order thing that does is my adversary says, oh, if I provoke them, they're going to be more likely to shoot me than they were before. I'm going to provoke them a little less. That's good for me. Now there's a second order effect also, which is like conditional on all of that. I'm firing a little too often and risking escalation and the like, but that, right, I was right there where I wanted to be, and now I'm just moving a little bit. I'm directly decreasing the amount of attacks he has, and then there's this second order thing. Okay, but when he does attack, maybe that effect kind of is going to be swamped by the deterrence effect in any kind of standard game theoretic analysis, and I think in the world. And so if we start with both perfectly aligned agents, we both have incentives to make our agents more aggressive. This is like kind of the dream in deterrence theory in general. This is the dream of the doomsday clock from Dr. Strangelove. If you can commit yourself to be more aggressive than you actually want to be, and you tell your adversary about it, that will convince them to do a lot less. You will deter them a lot. So we are going to have strategic incentives, even if we could align our AIs. We're going to have strategic incentives to disalign them in the direction of being more aggressive in order to get deterrence benefits, okay? And so you're going to get this kind of scaling up of aggression from your autonomous AIs because it solves this hand-tying problem that human beings have trouble solving. But if you automate and train the thing to actually feel more aggressive than you can solve that commitment. What does that mean? 9 what? Okay.
9 lots of one.
Okay, so all of this is to say, right, that the kind of alignment problems, AI on the battlefield creates lots of arms race kinds of dynamics that are going to lead us to deploy more capable, less aligned AIs than we oughta, and to make our AIs more aggressive than they should be. And this is bad for all of us. Right? It's good for me if I could do it unilaterally, but if we're all doing it, I'm in this kind of prisoner's dilemma arms race thing where we're all bummed out that we're doing this, but we can't help ourselves. And I'll just say it is unfortunate from my perspective, or from the perspective of peace, I guess, that this technology is happening in this way at a moment where multilateralism and the ability to create international agreements is at, let's say, an 80-year low. Okay, let's turn to cyber warfare. It does as ChatGPT does better, I think, with an image of cyber warfare. AI and cyber warfare. Okay, so AI has a variety of effects in cyber warfare. I will say you can use AI in cyber warfare on both the offense and the defense side, right? So AI on the offense side is good for doing things like finding vulnerabilities in existing systems, like building malware that's adaptive and can go out into the world and then change itself. And there's all sorts of amazing things you can do with AI on the offense side. You can use it on the defense side too, to, for example, examine existing systems for vulnerabilities that you might have missed, to do real-time defense and the like, because again, it can process information and make decisions fast. I'm not a computer scientist. I read a fair bit about computer scientists on cybersecurity. My reading of that is essentially everybody thinks, at least in the short to medium run, AI benefits the offense over the defense. The ability to identify new new attack vectors and to build new kinds of malware will outstrip in pace the ability to build defenses. So I'm going to make that assumption for now and think about what happens in a world where all of a sudden we are substantially more cyber capable on the offense side than we were. Okay, I want to point to two things. So the first is that I believe, and I've been writing some papers about this, that cyber capacity, cyber warfare is in a certain fundamental sense destabilizing to peace. It has some fundamental properties that make it destabilizing. And I'm just going to paint a picture of that for you very quickly, okay? The fundamental problem I want to argue is that cyber capacity, cyber attack, cyber warfare, they are good for warfighting, and they are no good for negotiating. Okay, why is that? So why are they good for warfighting? We have lots of examples of deploying cyber as a complement to traditional warfighting, right? The Russians go into Georgia or they go into Ukraine and they first start with a set of cyber attacks that disrupt communication networks, that disrupt financial networks, making it very difficult to move troops, to coordinate defense, to run logistics. This is a picture from a real case of a few years back. A series of North Korean missiles blew up. They were doing test launches and they kept blowing up on the launch pad. There are good reasons to think that that was the result of an American cyber operation, that we were inside their launch system and that we were making their missiles blow up. So, you know, you're the Americans, you think you might end up in a war with the North Koreans. If it turns out they thought they had a missile, they had a missile deterrent, but you know they didn't, that helps with warfighting, okay? So cyber can be used for warfighting, both on its own, because you can do damage through cyber attacks, but also as a complement to more traditional forms of warfare. Why is it no good for coercion or negotiations? Okay? It's no good for coercion or negotiations because cyber, unlike almost any other military technology that we have, only works if the other side doesn't know about it. You build a new missile system, that makes you militarily stronger, even the other side knows you have it, right? New airplane, new submarine, whatever. Cyber weapons are really, really easy to defeat if you know they're there, right? When the North Koreans figured this out, they could just replace their computer system. This is the nuclear facility in Natanz in Iran, which was the subject of an American cyber operation for many years. That was making its centrifuges fail over and over and over and over again. It was malware that was actually in almost every computer in the world, but it was sort of built to only turn on under this very specific configuration that existed only at Natanz. They spent years not knowing why their centrifuges didn't work. They did a lot of killing of engineers and the like. It wasn't nice. And then eventually, actually, a European researcher accidentally revealed to the Iranians that it was a US cyber operation. It was like, oh, this is this weird malware. It seems like it only turns on when it's like Natanz. Oops. And as soon as they know that, they can fix it. Okay. So why is that bad? That's bad because if you have a technology that is good for fighting, but you can't tell anybody about without losing the advantage, you can't use it for coercion. All of a sudden I know the North Koreans don't have a missile, right? Don't have missiles. I all of a sudden am way stronger than I used to be relative to them, and I might want to then renegotiate our deal. That's the kind of standard way we think that we achieve peace. Like we have a balance of rents or a balance of status that is in line with the balance of military power, so everyone thinks, let's not fight. And if somebody gets stronger, they can demand some more. They're like, you know what, I'm stronger now, I'd like some Greenland. And if they're right, they're stronger. The other side's like, well, I don't want to fight a war over this, right? And one of the ways that can break down, there's a couple of ways that can break down, but one of the important ways that can break down is when my understanding of my military power and your understanding of my military power don't match in ways that we can't undo by talking. Okay, and cyber is like that. If I tell you I've got the advantage, I lose the advantage. So it's a tool I can use to get stuff with power, but it is not, or with military power, but it is not a tool that I can use to get stuff through coercion and negotiation. And so this is destabilizing because you can get situations where one side's understanding of its military capacity, we believe we're way stronger than the North Koreans believe we are. And we can't tell them why. That's a very dangerous situation. So there's a kind of fundamental destabilization that comes along with increased cyber activity. Finally, let me just say a word about deterrence. So cyber also problematizes sort of very standard national security ideas that we have used to keep the peace through things like deterrence. I like this quote from William Lynn, who was the Deputy Secretary of Defense in the United States, whereas a missile comes with a return address, a computer virus generally does not. This is about the attribution problem. So another problem with cyber, besides the fact that you can't talk about it, is you don't always know who did it. You get hit with a cyber attack. You get hit with a missile and you know where it came from. You get hit with a cyber attack, you may not know who deployed it. And in fact, adversarial actors try to mask where the attacks would come. We have instances, for example, of the North Koreans engaged in cyber attacks against the United States, which they route through Chinese servers precisely so that we will misattribute the attack. Okay, so there's a fundamental attribution problem in cyber that doesn't exist in most of physical warfare. Why is that a problem? Well, there's a direct, obvious thing, which is just like if you think you can get away with an attack with nobody noticing, so you're not going to get bopped over the head for it, it's harder to deter you because I might not know you did it. But it goes deeper than that strategically. So I just want to walk you through really quickly. We're going to go back to multilateralism. We are accustomed to thinking about deterrence relationships in essentially bilateral terms. The United States nuclear arsenal deters the Russians, and the Russians' nuclear arsenal deters the United States. We think about it multilaterally in the sense that the United States maybe sometimes extends its nuclear umbrella over some other countries, but there's not like our deterrence of Russia does not depend in fundamental ways on the missile side and our deterrence of China. That's the sense of multilateralism that I'm thinking about. And that is not true in cyber. So let me just show you why. So imagine we're in this world, I'm the United States, and I've got a bunch of adversaries. I've got China, and I've got Russia, and I've got Iran, and I've got North Korea, and maybe they're all trying to attack me with cyber warfare. And I face some attribution problems. So let's imagine one of my adversaries becomes more aggressive, more capable. So the Chinese massively improve their AI capability, and now all of a sudden they're able to do a lot more cyber than them. Okay, so the Chinese are more active in cyberspace than they used to be. Whenever I, the United States, suffer a cyber attack that I have trouble attributing, I now must be more suspicious of the Chinese than I used to be because they're more active in this space. Right? So it's just more likely any given attack came from them than it used to be. And if it's more likely that the attack came from the Chinese, it must be less likely that it came from the Iranians or the North Koreans or the Russians. So the fact that I become more suspicious of the Chinese when I have a hard to attribute attack because they got AI means I become less suspicious of my other adversaries. Well, what does that mean strategically for my other adversaries? They know that if they engage in a hard to attribute attack, they are less suspect and so less likely to face retaliation. And so they too are going to become more aggressive. This is the fundamental multilateralism or interconnectedness of deterrence in cyberspace that doesn't exist in deterrence in physical space. And it's because of attribution problems. The Chinese become more aggressive. I become more suspicious of the Chinese and less suspicious of others. That makes others less likely to face retaliation following a hard to attribute attack, and that makes them more aggressive too. So if one adversary becomes more capable, everybody becomes more aggressive, even if those other adversaries themselves didn't become more technologically capable. There's just this fundamental complementarity or multilateralism that runs through beliefs and suspicion. And so that means a couple things, right? If we become worse at deterring any one of our adversaries, we become worse at deterring all of them. And on the flip side, if one of our adversaries becomes more capable, for example, by developing new AI models, all of our adversaries become more aggressive. And that then has implications for how we should think about policy. We should think about trying to deter or deny access to those who we have the most leverage over rather than those who are the biggest actors. Because whoever we can deter or deny, that's going to spill over through the system. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up there. I've tried to talk about two different topics, battlefield AI, and I think that's sort of the inevitability of highly autonomous, highly capable AI systems because they provide such large tactical advantages, and the problem of alignment that's going to come both because of the rush that's going to be imposed on us by arms races to roll out highly capable AI even before we've gotten comfortable on alignment, and moreover, the strategic incentives to disalign our agents in order to gain strategic advantages on the battlefield. And then the role of AI in cyber warfare, that as we become more capable in cyber warfare, this has the potential for sort of fundamentally destabilizing by breaking down informational understandings and decoupling the balance of military power from the balance of rents, and also creating attribution problems that problematize standard concepts that we use to keep the peace, like deterrence.
Thank you very much, Ethan, for this very uplifting talk. Everyone next door after Q&A, we all need it now. We are gonna take first a few questions from the audience and Olaf.
I don't like
Do you have something apart to note because the might take now?
I don't.
You want this?
Yes, that might help if we take a few questions in the floor. Or like, oh yeah, I'm gonna start like this. We do the 4 questions here, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Who starts then?
You start.
Okay.
Sorry.
Hi. Should I stand up or like?
If you want, you can introduce yourself. And I think I unmuted it. Sorry, this is me not being here.
Hi, I'm Roberto Rafael. I'm a PhD student in the Department of Economics. Thank you very much for the presentation. So completely agree on everything, and I might know other people here too, but this is like an explanation of these are the consequences of this technology, these are the problems. Now, I was very interested in hearing what are the possible solutions and which key players you think have like a maybe moral obligation to act to kind of like stop an arms race or PDOM exploding, or kind of like those kind of like situations. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Ewan Grant, UK Defence Forum. I've been talking and broadcasting quite a lot on the Ukraine war, and one of the books I used was Mark Greeny's follow-up from the notes Tom Clancy left behind, which, as you know from your time at NSA, I mean, that had almost everything, but it didn't have this. So it shows how much this is a new game changer. So my question is, something you highlighted, that you cannot declare what you have because of the danger. Is anyone thinking on a cold, hard-headed, we won't hit you if you won't hit us, ways of talking to the enemy, and I use the word enemy deliberately about that, because frankly, I think the idea that international treaties can do anything about this and the UN can do anything about this is for the birds, quite frankly. Thank you.
Thank you for the wonderful talk. There are, of course, laws about how war is conducted on the battlefield, which always makes me laugh. But how are the laws are they keeping up with the advances of AI? And are we to be disturbed also with the international, this lack of development happening from a legal point of view internationally? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm kind of following the last two on my skepticism for international humanitarian law and its efficacy in dealing with AI. I'm kind of going to shift the question. I don't think that legal routes are going to be able to fix this with the accountability mechanisms. So I'm curious, what do you think could be a way to keep battlefield AI accountable towards states and for international relations? Thank you.
I wish I had, so these are all very similar questions. I wish I had a cheerful answer for them. There is, sure, there's lots of people talking about, there's lots of people talking about norms, regimes, and the like. I think share all of your skepticism about the power of those things. There is interesting work. This is not my area, and I don't follow it super carefully, but I do read about it occasionally, about people in particular thinking about the laws of war and AI. There's work both about sort of how do we change, how might we need to adapt and expand the laws of war about AI. There are also questions about attributability and who is guilty under the laws of war for war crimes committed by autonomous agents that are also not worked out in important ways. So I am skeptical that we're going to get to a norms-based solution. When you talk to US, certainly when you talk to US cyber war planners, they do talk a lot about trying to talk to our adversaries and create norms-based regimes. So I take that actually, I take that seriously.
if all of the war planners think it could work, in fact, it could, like the thing that it takes for it to work is for the war planners to all believe it's going to work. And so I take seriously that they talk about it a lot more than game theorists tend to talk about it. They know something about what their world is like that we don't know. So I think that's that's a little bit heartening. The other thing I'd say, I guess, and some of the AI alignment people talk about this stuff, and some of the military people talk about this stuff, we have had, in fact, not, an overwhelmingly successful, but a pretty successful nuclear proliferation regime for a long time. And it was, largely norms-based. There are sanctions for bad behavior, but those sanctions are enforced by norms. Like it's turtles all the way down. It worked a lot. We had an international body that was we have an international body that is in the nuclear inspection business and is monitoring countries that we're worried about. I think that problem is harder for AI than it is for nuclear. Nuclear is way easier to detect with remote sensing and the like than our computer programs. And so that's tricky. I think it's going to be way harder to do monitoring. It is also, we also don't really have, and the AI alignment and AI safety people think a lot about this, we don't really have the technology for interrogating whether an AI model is trained to behave well or badly, because it's the case that they can be trained to behave well while being examined. And so it's very like there's lots of technical work to be done on the computer science side about thinking about even what a technology for monitoring would be. And I think most of that work is being done not in the context of trying to think about international agreements. It's being done in the context even of inside an AI lab of its own that is in fact worried about the alignment and safety characteristics of the model it made. They are worried about being fooled by their own models. And so they are thinking about it even internal to themselves. But those same problems obviously exist kind of all the more so when you're adversarially inspecting models being deployed by other nations. So I think we don't know. I don't have, I think, good ideas about what a policy regime is going to look like that's going to keep us safe. For me, the starting point has been to try and think about what are the implications and risks. And I think if we have a good understanding of the implications and risk, hopefully smart people can start working on what solutions might be, but I regret to say that I'm not as smart as that.
Another random question.
Thanks, great talk, lots of fun. I was hoping for clarification. Intellectual fun. Exactly. Quick clarification on the underlying game theory in your first half. We know that if I incredibly pre-commit to destroy you, you try to destroy me, then that improves the nature of the equilibrium. What is it about AI that makes that commitment more likely as opposed to less likely? Maybe it's obvious, but it wasn't at least obvious.
No, I think it's not obvious. I think that's a good question. So the way I think about it is I don't think what the equilibrium looks like is we want to build a doomsday machine, nor do I think we will build a doomsday machine. Right. I think what the equilibrium looks like is we want to be somewhat more, and how much more just depends on facts about the world, right? But we want to be somewhat more aggressive than we would be at perfect alignment. As to our adversaries. Yeah. And the reason we don't want to be, we don't want to build the doomsday machine, is because there's always possibilities of small mistakes, right? Sure. And so once there's possibilities of small mistakes, right, you got T-bone Pickens, didn't get the radio transmission, now we're all dead. Okay, so why is AI a useful tool for this? I think the reason AI is a useful tool for this is because the commitment problem is about ex ante versus ex post decision making. And if you go to the lab and you train the AI and then you deploy it, you have taken the ex post decision making out of your hands and you have put it in the hands of something else. So you have, in fact, on the battlefield, tied your hands because you can't correct it as fast as it can do things. So it's going to be doing things at a speed, right, that human beings can't keep up with. So it's not like ex post you're going to be able to say, oh, stop, because it's already gone.
right? And so now you get to commit ex ante to a more aggressive AI, deploy it in the field, and now you really can't turn, I mean, you can turn it off, maybe, but it's made a lot of decisions right before that you can't monitor. And so that's a kind of hand tying that I think we haven't, there's other tools for hand tying, like it's not like we don't have any tools for hand tying, but I think it is a particularly powerful one when you can deploy it to make.
So the key assumption is that once you say run, 10 minutes later, I cannot say stop.
I mean, that once I say run and we're out in the battlefield, it's going to be doing things at a speed that I can't monitor, right? And so I take the ex post out of my hands.
Thank you very much for a gloomy but I think prescient talk. The good news is there's a Tilda Swinton indie art house movie available now, which is an apocalyptic musical. I watched it last night. So if you do need light entertainment, there is stuff available. But I wanted to ask you on cyber warfare. I mean, I think you made some really important points about deter where you can, rather than necessarily deter the principal actor that you might be concerned about. I just wondered though if you might tease out a little bit more of a so what. So if you're speaking to a practitioner or policy audience, what does that mean in terms of the practice of what I assume would be thinking multilaterally, but potentially acting bilaterally? And I'm particularly interested, do you think track 1.5 meetings, basically where you bring very smart deans of a Harris school together with Russians and Chinese and others, it is an effective, useful way to try and increase awareness of strategic risk and potentially mitigate it?
Should I take several?
Just answer this one.
Okay. All right. So on the first one, yeah, I have had this conversation a little bit with military officers in the United States. Here's what I'm reacting to at least. So our resources are constrained for deterrence. Like we have limited resources for how we deploy our deterrent resources and how we deploy our denial resources for things like compute. And when you read US national security strategies, they always, going way back, they always say things like, here is our biggest adversary in the world, focus your resources on that. Stop paying attention to the smaller actors. Let's downplay our worrying about Iran and North Korea. The Chinese are the problem. And that is a kind of thinking that you just find across administrations in the United States. And I think, and that's true even in the cyber strategy. And I think it's a mistake in the cyber strategy, or at least it's potentially a mistake in the cyber strategy, in the sense that it is for sure true the Chinese, along with the North Koreans, are the most active in cyberspace. Okay, that's been true for a while, and for sure the Chinese now are. But they may also be very, very difficult for us to move. And we just may have way more levers over some other adversaries. And if that's true, they would know better than I whether that's true. But if that's true, it might be a mistake to be focusing in on the Chinese for increased efforts, because it could be that by clarifying the environment, by deterring others, if we could get the North Koreans and the Iranians to really stop, so that essentially every cyber attack is China or Russia, that might put us in a better deterrence position relative to China and Russia than directly trying to get China and Russia each to decrease by 10%, but still be flooding with them. And so I don't know, right? Like there's a bunch of contingencies in there about where are our levers and how active are our various adversaries. But I do think this logic does not find its way into our thinking. We think in very bilateral terms about cyber deterrence in exactly the way we think about in bilateral terms about other kinds of deterrence. We don't think about the information spillover. At least we don't. I don't know. Who knows what people think about behind closed doors? We don't write about the information spillovers that matter for cyber deterrence. And so that's kind of what we were reacting to when we started thinking about this.
Two final questions, but Ethan will hang around at the reception. So if you have some question, don't hesitate. The two questions are over there. I'm sorry, they're at the back.
Hi, I'm Juliet. I'm from Public School of Public Policy. And my question is about that. You mentioned that in cyber welfare that it won't be able to make deterrence or coercion in a certain degree. And I wonder that in terms of the hardware that's supporting the AI to be battlefield AI, then does that, when it becomes highly reliant on the supply chain, the countries who have these resources as supply chains will they have the power of coercion or deterrence, and how does that might affect the dynamic of geopolitical relation?
Hello, I'm Shane. I work in strategic planning and also planning something like that in the universities. I also volunteer a bit for the civil defense. So I'll ask a question about like civil defense and also strategic weapons. Thanks for your insight about strategic aggressions. They make me remind me about a Soviet system called Death Hand in the past. They find it very aggressive, so they do not, correctly, if I'm wrong, they do not turn it on. But as you mentioned that strategic aggressions, people tend to be more aggressive, the policymaker tend to be more aggressive to convince the adversary that they are real and they're strong. I have real concern about how to regulate this kind of, in the past we have START treaty, but how to regulate in the process of decision making behind the use of nuclear weapons and nuclear weapons. In terms of conventional weapons, like currently we have a gospel model, ML model, and also I think Levada model is using in the Middle East. They say that, I mean, Guardian report, there was a report about the insider who are using this kind of system. They say that they have only 20 seconds in decision-making stage, and to decide whether the weapons should be used or not. And the legal advisors from the military have limited, overloaded massive numbers. So how could how could this military organization match up the challenge from the AI in terms of decision makings?
In terms of what?
Match up the challenge from decision makings or using AI. I'm also more further concerned if the adversary using AI as a decision making tool to help them to speed up targeting, it will pose a significant damage to civil defense because the target will massively expand. Please give me some insight. Thank you very much.
Okay, so let me start with the AI supply chains. So, what do I want to say? I think it is obviously true that as AI becomes not only for the military, but increasingly important for the economy, it is in fact a bad thing for national security for countries that are dependent on their adversaries for their supply chains. I think that that's an uncomfortable but true diagnosis of the modern world. And it is not, I think the retrenchment we're seeing in some of our trade policies in the direction of saying, you know, it's one thing to have free trade and supply chain dependence with your friends. It is another thing to have free trade and supply chain dependence with your adversaries or enemies is a pretty, like, I mean, I work at the University of Chicago, so I'm going to be in trouble, but it's not like maybe like the most sensible, Chicago economics thought, but it is a pretty sensible national security thought. And so I do think it is totally reasonable for national leaders and military planners to worry that they could be militarily coerced by adversaries who control critical inputs to AI, as well as critical inputs to other parts of the economy or the military. And so I think like the world is just kind of starting to have that conversation, which is kind of miraculous, actually. But I don't think that that's an unreasonable thought. I think that is a reasonable thought. That is an unfortunate fact about the world. I mean, I think it does mean that we're poorer than we hope it to be. But I do think people thinking about national security policy do think about supply chain and their ability to be coerced if potential adversaries have access to vital resources, either for the economy or for the military. In terms of civil defense, and I guess I would say the same thing I said about battlefield AI, which is just I think there is no human match. You simply cannot run modern civil defenses on human decision making alone. Decisions have to be made way too fast. Modern missile defense systems depend on at best human in the loop, and some of them no human at all, completely autonomous assessment and firing decisions, precisely because they barely have any time at all to decide whether to fire, and that's only going to get worse. right? So, you know, we now face a world with hypersonic missiles, et cetera. It's just gonna get harder and harder to depend on human in the loop or human on the loop decision making. And I think that's the same problem as battlefield AI. I think that civil defense AI and battlefield AI, with respect to these things, face the same problems. And we have to work on, we're going to live in that world, and then we have to work on what does it mean to make that world as safe as possible. That world is different than the world that I grew up accustomed to. And there it is.
All right, thank you very much, Ethan, for this.